Without Genesis 1 and 2, it is impossible to understand the Bible and really anything at all, because those first 2 chapters set the foundation for everything else that follows. How we understand who God is, what the world is, who we are, where history is heading. This is God's storyline, where in a series of 10 videos, I'm going to show you how all the parts of the Bible fit together into one amazing storyline of how God rescues a broken world through Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, but if you're going to do the whole Bible in 10 videos, aren't you going a bit slow just doing Genesis 1 and 2 in the first one? Hello, Boffin Zoe here, ready to help answer tricky questions where normal Zoe maybe isn't quite up to it. So, in answer, Genesis 1 and 2 is so utterly vital for understanding everything else. We've just got to spend the time there. I promise we'll speed up in the next videos. Thanks, Boffin. And if you do want a big old overview of the whole Bible in just one video, then check out this video here. But today, let's start at page 1, Genesis chapters 1 and 2, and the blueprint kingdom. Now, it's called this because it sets a perfect pattern, like a kind of blueprint for all the other kingdoms to come. And immediately in the Bible, a whole bunch of really important things happen. In the beginning, God created, which means there's no arguments for the existence of God, no Marvel-style origin story, no birth myth, no battle from which God emerges. He just is. In the beginning, God created. That means there's nothing beyond God by which he can be evaluated. And certainly we can't stand out here and question him. God's first, he's primary, all else is secondary. Okay, next. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, which also means so everything else is created. Time, matter, the universe sits here as stuff created by the Creator. Everything depends on God for its existence. So we don't have pantheism, meaning everything in the universe is God, or dualism, God versus something else, such as God versus Satan or God versus some other evil power. No, in reality, Satan is here. Also, note there's only one of God, so no polytheism, i.e. loads of gods kind of fighting it out. There's God, and then there's everything else he created. And the creator stuff is very different to him. There's no competition, there's no blurred lines. He's the creator, and then there's the creation. That's it. Okay, next. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters." The second day. Can I just interrupt? What do these days mean? 24 hours or a super long period of prehistory? Isn't it like a massive deal to work that out? Well, I'd argue the Bible-believing Christians can have legitimately different interpretations of how long these 6 days of creation last. And I think that's because the text is ambiguous about how long they are. You see, it's a mixed genre, being both historical, i.e. it really happened, and Jesus talks about Adam as a real individual person who lived. But the text is also symbolic, i.e. the days could stand for something longer than 24 hours. So if it's symbolic, doesn't that mean it's not true? Rather, it's more like a myth. No, using symbolism doesn't automatically preclude it also being true or referring to actual history. Think about the statement, "The years of World War I created a bloodstain across all of Europe that would be hard to wash out." Now, is that stating a historical truth? Well, yes. In no way is it suggesting that World War I was a kind of mythical event. Quite the opposite. It's a comment telling us a historical truth, but the statement's using symbolic language to convey that truth. There wasn't a literal bloodstain stretching thousands of miles across Europe, but it was truly and historically an era of great violence with lasting implications. So Genesis is like this. The days, for example, could be symbolic of a period of time rather than a literal 24 hours, but the account is still historically true, i.e. the stages in the creation account actually happened in that order done by God as stated. Okay, back to the storyline. Where were we? God had just spoken day 2 into existence. And there's another thing to note here. See, God's not an abstract power source, a kind of unmoved mover. No, he speaks, and more than that, he creates by speaking. That's his jam. We can't do that. We can't make matter from nothing. We can just arrange the stuff that's already here. But God speaks, and bam, stuff comes into existence. But I don't get how God can speak and we understand it if he's so different to us. Wouldn't that be impossible? Like a human trying to talk to an amoeba? Well, later on in Genesis 1, God talks to Adam and Eve and they do understand him. And this goes on through the whole Bible, God speaking to us. So despite God's transcendence, he's not distant. He can make himself understood in language whenever he wants. And why wouldn't he be able to do that? He's God. He's not going to be gagged by his own divine qualities. Right, next.
And then God said, "Let dry ground appear, and let the land produce vegetation," the 3rd day. Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky, the 4th day. Let the waters teem with living creatures. And let the birds fly above the earth, the 5th day. Let the land produce living creatures. And God saw that it was good. And God saw that it was good. And God saw that it was good. And God saw that it was good.
There's no disease, no disasters, no illness, pain, decay, death, which means the creator of that stuff is good. Now, we shouldn't take this for granted. I just watched a Netflix show called Chaos. It's kind of like a modern take on the Greek gods, and Zeus, who's played by Jeff Goldblum, who's completely amazing, his character is like hideous. He's like mean, he's capricious, he's idiotic, he's violent. Imagine if God was like that. We'd be in such trouble. Just think about it. Honestly, it'd be so bad. But the actual God of the universe is not like Zeus. The real God is a good God.
Now, excuse me, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room. How does all this creation talk tie into science? Hasn't creation been disproven by the Big Bang? Surely no scientist in their right mind believes this, etc., etc. No. Firstly, there are lots of Christian scientists in their right mind who know heaps of stuff about science and still believe in the Bible's account of creation. Now, that doesn't mean automatically you have to believe in creation, but you can't knock it by saying that nobody serious believes it, because that's just not true. Secondly, philosophical atheists, i.e. people who believe there's only matter and space and time and that kind of everything else is a fairy tale, they do need to answer, well, where did the first matter come from then? Now, their answer generally is, well, it came from nothing, i.e. the Big Bang or whatever you want to call it. In science, this starting event is called a singularity, meaning a unique one-off event where the normal laws of science don't apply. So actually, a scientific impossibility. Hence why it's a singularity. It has its own set of laws just for itself. But that's essentially a belief. It has no physical evidence, so by definition, you can't prove it scientifically. And that means the singularity acts suspiciously like a small g God. You just got to believe it or not. So then the question is, well, whose explanation of the world is better? Christianity's, where the first matter was made by an all-powerful, all-good, forever existing God, or the first matter was made by a singularity which science can never explain. Okay, fair dues on that point, but can you talk about intelligent design? I've heard Christians argue that the created world proves the existence of God, and then atheists say that it doesn't. There are many things you could say about this. Oh, Buffin, that's enough. Let me have a turn. Well, the argument from intelligent design goes like this. 1, it's statistically unlikely that chance mutation comes up with such complex, wonderful things as orchids or children's toenails or cumulus clouds. But the objection goes like this. We only think the random mutations of these things are unlikely because we just don't yet understand the mechanisms by which they come about. We're just using God to plug the gaps we can't explain. But once science progresses and we do get explanations and we fill those gaps, we don't need God anymore. And I think this is actually quite a good objection. But as Christians, I'd say we don't want to argue that God's existence is proved by the gaps in our scientific knowledge, the so-called God of the gaps. But that doesn't mean that the creator-creation framework isn't better than philosophical atheism's dumb matter one. I'll let Boffin explain. Thank you. Okay, so as Christians, we start with an assumption of a creator. There's no proof. By definition, he is his own first cause. He's self-attesting. We're not going to use the God of the gaps kind of arguments. But then we do science and we see that the world is fabulously marvellous, orchids and toenails and clouds, etc. And we see that the joy and the wonder that we just can't help feel about it all fits really well in a framework where we naturally praise and thank the good creator behind it. Philosophical atheists, on the other hand, assume a void. There's no final causality behind the material world. Then they do science and they see that the world is fabulously marvellous and they feel joy and wonder and naturally want to praise and thank someone or something. But they can't do that. There's just nothing behind the world. It's just atoms bumping into each other. So those feelings are merely irrational superstition. And if the philosophical atheist was to soften up a bit and say, well, we can rejoice in nature or matter itself, well, they're just turning nature into a god and a causality worth rejoicing over. And so they've kind of contradicted their own system. Fair dues, Boffin, but let's get back to Genesis 1 and 2. So what next? So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And then we zoom into this event in chapter 2. For Adam, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. And then we go back to the summary in chapter 1. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. So we're made in God's image. That means we share his likeness. We reflect him to the world. And that gives us incredible dignity and worth, even if we're an unborn baby or a geriatric Alzheimer's sufferer. We're also male and female. We're equal, but we're different. Men and women are made of the same stuff. So Eve's from Adam's flesh. She's not made from the dust like the animals. And she completes him as his helper. And we're also actually super important. We're made as God's vice regents to lovingly rule the earth, to work it and take care of it. And this is another way that we reflect him as his image bearers. And this is the big one. We are accountable to our Creator. He rules us. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." Now, there's a basic assumption here that God is the one who rules. He shows them what's good and what will bless them and what actions are bad and will harm them. Mankind doesn't get to decide that for themselves. Isn't that unfair? How come God's the only one who gets to set the rules? What about human freedom? What about the right to self-determination? Well, when it comes to how we interact with other creatures, you're right. There should be self-determination, not coercion or rule. But things are very different when we step back and think about the relationship of the entire created order to its creator. You see, if God made the moral order itself and he stands outside of it, then surely he has every right to explain to us what that moral order is, because it was his doing. And if he is sovereign over all things, if not one atom moves without his sustaining power, letting it be so, and he's created human autonomy and freedom to exist within his sovereign rule, then surely he has the right to explain to us our place in his world. And as a loving, good creator who has our best interest at heart, who knows far better than we do what will make us thrive and give us joy, surely we'd be wise to listen to the good boundaries that he sets in place. So to sum all of that up, even though Genesis 1 and 2 doesn't use the word king, the big idea in everything we've seen is this. He is the good ruler of the kingdom he's created, the world. And listen up to this. There's a framework here that we're going to see repeated throughout the Bible. This is the blueprint for the rest of the storyline. It's a kingdom consisting of God, the king, with his people, Adam and Eve, in perfect relationship with him and each other. In God's place, Eden and the created order, which itself is in harmony with God and his people, and all of it is under God's rule and blessing. But this was all a very, very long time ago. How exactly is this relevant to me today? Well, we've already seen this creation account give us fundamental truths about God, and because God doesn't change, they're as true today as they were then. But we all know this blueprint kingdom got messed up. That's the fall, which we're going to look at in the next video. And then the rest of the Bible is the story of how God fixes that. So in answer to Objection Zoe's question, Genesis 1 and 2 is relevant because God uses creation, the original blueprint kingdom, as the pattern for what's going to come in the future. He's going to create a new fulfilled kingdom for us to live in that's even better than Eden. It's going to be a new creation. So we look back to see who God is and who we are, but we also look forward to see the future that is still awaiting us, and it's going to be good. And if you want to see now what that's going to look like, then check out this video where I do a full overview of the whole Bible in one video, showing how all God's kingdoms fit together and how they point to Christ.